I'm grateful. I'm grateful for my gun, and I hate that I need it. But I'm grateful for the fact that when I do, I have the ability to carry it. I hate the fact that people I love are in danger, but I love the fact that neither I nor my people are helpless victims anymore. I hate my gun, but I'm grateful for it. So wrote Rabbi Daniel Hartman, president of the Jerusalem think tank, the Hartman Institute. I don't have a gun. It's a sentiment that a mere 75 years ago was hardly thinkable. For 2,000 years, Rabbi Hartman said, Jews were largely helpless victims. They had no guns, no way to defend themselves, and they were often at the whims of brutal regimes. Today, with the establishment of the State of Israel, thank God this is no longer the case. Today, we have power. This morning, I want to take some time to explore the topic of Jews and power. I've been thinking about it recently, in part because of Kanye West and other anti-Semites who are hitting the airwaves saying that Jews wield too much power. Jews control, take your pick, Hollywood, business, government, banks. I've also been thinking about Jews and power in the aftermath of Israel's recent election that is bringing into the governing coalition a far-right political party called Otzma Yehudit, Jewish power. To talk about Jews and power, it's a bit scary and uneasy. For some, fear that doing so may inadvertently feed dangerous conspiracy theories. For others, it's unsettling because it raises ambivalence about that very power. Former Israeli Knesset member Einat Wilf explained in an article called Jewish Power and Powerlessness, she said that some Jews have the mistaken notion that we are a uniquely moral people, capable of managing power differently than other people. We're not. We don't, she says. And yet, for Jews, it has been comforting to consider ourselves on, let's say, a higher moral plane. The problem is, Wilf argues, that we have conflated powerlessness with morality. We've forgotten that the supposed moral behavior of Jews over the centuries existed because we were powerless. We experienced none of the moral dilemmas faced by those who had power. So, Jews and power, it's complicated. At times we feel powerless, we feel threatened. Listen, we post guards at our doors for good reasons. We're worried about those conspiracy theories. On the other hand, individually and collectively, in Israel and in the diaspora, Jews do wield a certain amount of power, as do, of course, many other people in many other places. Listen, we've worked hard for it. We've overcome tremendous odds to achieve it. Acknowledging our sense of insecurity, but at the same time acknowledging our strength, begs for us the question, how should we use the power that we can muster? Let's set the stage by going back to Europe, to Basel, 1898. There at the Second Zionist Congress, Max Nordau took the podium. Nordau, who co-founded the World Zionist Congress with Herzl, spoke about the need to create what he called the new Jew. We must create, once again, Jewry of muscles, he said. In the narrow Jewish streets of the past, our poor limbs forgot their gay movements. The fear of constant persecution turned our powerful voices into frightened whispers, which rose in a crescendo only when our martyrs cried out their dying prayers. But now we are allowed our bodies space to live again, he concluded. And so let us take up our oldest traditions. Let us once more become deep-chested, sturdy, sharp-eyed men. Nordau's words and his work help inspire what he called Muskeljudentum, muscular Judaism. In the literal sense, they led students to establish a network of Jewish gymnasiums around Europe. Now, admittedly, it's a bit ironic that these sports clubs eventually led to the establishment of the Jewish version of the Olympics, the Maccabi Games, because the Maccabees themselves violently opposed Greek gymnasiums. But Nordau was right when he said that he was out to restore Jewish power. He was right to trace power back before the time of Jewish European victimhood. And he could have even turned to this week's Parsha to do so. We read in Parshat Vayetze about Jacob pausing his travels at a well. There he encountered a group of shepherds watering their flocks. So the Torah examines the scene in great detail. It says that there was a big stone that was covering the well. The shepherds needed to roll the stone off the well to water their flocks and then roll it back to cover the well when they were done. So Jacob and the shepherds, they're kibitzing, and Jacob says to them, it's still daylight. Why don't you water your flock? And they answered, well, there's this enormous stone covering the well, meaning that they couldn't muster the strength to move it. Just then, along came Rachel. Jacob noticed her, and the Torah continues, when Jacob saw Rachel, he went up and he removed the stone from the mouth of the well and he watered the flock. I don't know if you caught that the Torah doesn't say that Jacob rolled the stone off the well, rather he removed it. Rashi writes, Jacob did so as easily as uncorking a bottle, showing you just how strong he was. Lahodiecha shekocho gadol. That strength would later come in handy when Jacob wrestles an angel to a draw. In this scene, Jacob's strength was even more remarkable than lifting a rock that 3 shepherds couldn't budge. The 13th century Spanish Rabbi Rabbeinu Bachia reminds us that Jacob, he had to be very tired after a long journey. Moreover, he hadn't been working out in a gym. He'd been sitting in yeshiva, says Rabbeinu Bachia, day in and day out for 14 years, learning Torah. In this moment, then, Jacob really does become a muscular Jew. But let's face it, he was really just showing off to get a girl. He wanted to impress Rachel with his pecs. In contrast, when Rebecca met Eliezer at the same well a few years earlier, she demonstrated her strength by bringing water to a flock of camels, but really she wasn't showing off her muscles. She was showing off her heart, her chesed, her kindness, her caring, her generosity. You see, strength can be used for good, power for protection. It can also be used as a demonstration of pride. And indeed, we take pride in our power. When we see a list of Jews who have risen to points of prominence in academia, in the government, yes, in Hollywood, we take pride when we hear about IDF fighter pilots flying over Auschwitz, and we say, I'm grateful for our guns. But I also hate our guns. And there are times when I fear our power, like right now in the aftermath of Israel's election. For those who have not made Aliyah and do not have Israeli citizenship, Israel is our homeland, not our home. As such, we don't have a vote, but that doesn't mean that we don't or shouldn't have a voice. Otzma Yehudit means Jewish power or Jewish strength. And in the recent Israeli elections, it gained enough seats to be brought into the governing coalition. As I tell you about them, it's important to understand that this party received only 10% of the vote. But because of Israel's parliamentary democracy, even small parties can wield outsized power. To say that Otzma represents a small minority of the Israeli electorate. By comparison, here in America, a much larger percentage of voters have endorsed candidates that you and I might consider extreme. Still, we have to confront our discomfort. Otzma Yehudit is the ideological descendant of the outlawed Kach party. Its current leader, Ben Gvir, was a disciple of Meir Kahane, who was convicted of acts of terrorism. Until recently, Ben Gvir had a picture of the notorious Jewish terrorist Baruch Goldstein hanging in his home. In the previous election cycle, AIPAC spoke out firmly, saying that they would not meet with members of this racist and reprehensible party. So what does Otzma Yehudit stand for? It calls for the annexation of the West Bank and Israeli sovereignty over the Temple Mount. It advocates for a one-state solution. Ben Gvir has called for the deportation of Arab extremists and all Arabs who are not loyal to Israel. Now, to be fair, one might have a reasonable discussion regarding some of these political positions. After all, there are people on the far left who also are calling for a one-state solution. And even as Ben Gvir has called for deporting non-loyal Arabs, he's also called for deporting non-loyal Jews, such as the anti-Zionist ultra-Orthodox Neturei Karta. As troubled as I am by specific policies, what I truly fear is the effect of their entrance into the government on right-wing extremists. For too long, a small group of extremist settlers and rogue IDF soldiers have acted with impunity, attacking and abusing Palestinians. And for too long, and sometimes too often, the Israeli government has looked the other way. Now with Otzma Yehudit, these extremists may be given permission to do even more than uproot a few olive trees and vandalize some mosques. Now their behavior, which is already normalized in some ways, will become legalized. And that might sound a bit familiar to us in the US. We've also had experience with leaders who subtly and not so subtly have given permission to extremists to act. Now it's important to understand who supported this party and why. In the face of ongoing terrorist attack like last week's bus bombing in Jerusalem, and in the face of lawlessness, which has taken over certain sectors of Israel's south, and in the response to what we might call generational trauma of powerlessness, voters supported a party they felt would best protect Jews and the Jewish state. Ben Gvir addressed voters' anger, fear, and sense of insecurity. Some of his supporters might not agree with his more extreme positions. At the same time, by endorsing that party, they become responsible for its policies, and we should not hesitate to condemn them if there's abuse of power. Not by might and not by power, but by spirit alone, said the prophet Zechariah, lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach ki im beruchi. Surprisingly, the rabbis assigned these very words to be read on Hanukkah, which is the most muscular of our holidays as we celebrate a military victory. Not by might and not by power? Not exactly. We needed that might to overcome. Even Zechariah, in a way, agreed. He said simply that that might and that power came from the Kadosh Baruch Hu, came from God. The verse concludes, Amar Adonai Tzivaot, thus said the Lord of the heavenly host, the Lord of the heavenly army. We on earth, on the other hand, we need might. We needed might to defeat the powerful Greek army that sought our destruction. And we still need power. In the face of growing anti-Semitism, in the face of ongoing threats against Israel, I'm grateful for my gun. I don't have a gun. But in another way, I hate my gun. Zechariah was right. Power without God's Spirit, power without limits, power without ethics is dangerous. Power just for the sake of pride, that's vain. Power should be for protection, yes, but also for chesed, to pursue justice and to achieve peace. And so as we look ahead to lighting the Hanukkah lights in the weeks to come, we pray, Ma'oz Tzur, Rock of Israel, give us strength. Help us exercise our power with might and with right. Teach us to appreciate the privilege of power. Instill in us the responsibility of power. Open our eyes to the potential of power to bring healing and hope and peace. Baruch atah Hashem ozer Israel bigvura. Amen. Continue with Musaf, Mud 150.